Hello everyone, my name is Heman and I am a research associate at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. This interview series is hosted by SARIM. Today we have the Anubhav Singh on our board. Anubhav Singh is a Dalit activist and a thinker based in Boston. He has studied at the Fletcher School of International Affairs at Tufts University and at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where he focused on the political economy of South Asian and the Middle East countries. He has worked under Professor Aisha Jalal on political economy, caste movement in India, and caste and Hindutva politics. Without any further ado, let's dive into the questions. My first question is, Mr. Singh, as you hail from a Dalit community, you are the most appropriate person to shed the light on challenging aspects of being Dalit in India. What sort of difficulties you have encountered as a member of marginalized group? Have you ever felt insecure or been mistreated or discriminated against because of your identity? Why do caste and caste discrimination interest you?
Thank you, Heman, and I'd like to thank Sarim for this opportunity of airing my views and talking to me about caste and caste discrimination in India and largely South Asia. So, as you've asked me about the kind of difficulties that I've encountered as a member of a marginalized group, I mean, if we look at discrimination along caste lines in India, which I have encountered, I would say that it began right from school, where where people find out about what caste you belong to, and then the discrimination starts in the form of social ostracization, not including you in group activities or class activities, isolating you, or where teachers take us, exercise a certain degree of bias against you. Where I was once told, for example, by an upper caste teacher that that even though I was good at studies, I was very arrogant and I should probably go and kill myself. To that extent. So yes, I mean, I have encountered similar kind of prejudices at college level as well. But having said that, I would say that as one progresses up the class ladder, this kind of discrimination that one encounters tends to become more subtle. So I would say that I'm not as vulnerable to physical violence as such as some of the other Dalits who do not have a class position like me are. But people like me, who go to the best of institutes, exercise a degree of class privilege, are still vulnerable to discrimination, and particularly an insidious degree of sort of a psychological violence, which comes with this sort of discrimination, with alienation, with ostracization, or with harassment through, by your own colleagues or your professors. So, and particularly when you are very vocal about asserting your identity and calling out the injustice that you and your community suffer from, then it tends to get even more insidious. And it happens across all kinds of spaces, whether it's academic spaces, the public sector, the private sector, any official space. And that is the reason why I'd like to understand that how caste as an institution has evolved, both socially, economically, as well as politically. And what is the way of actually what Ambedkar talked about, annihilating caste from India? And that is exactly what motivates me. That is a very strong degree of motivation about caste annihilation in India, which inspires me.
During my research, I came to know that more than 160 million people in India are considered untouchables. Yeah. And people tempted by their birth into a caste system that deem them impure, less than human. In that regard, my second question is caste a secular category or a religious category? Why is the caste structure so strong in India? And on what basis caste has been discriminated against in the country? Can you let us know about how caste is debated in India today?
Right. So I think it's a very good question about caste being a secular or a religious category, because as far as South Asia is concerned, you would find that caste is almost ubiquitous throughout the subcontinent, irrespective of religion. So while it is, of course, explicitly religious in Hinduism, given that it has some sort of religious sanction, it is also present within Muslims, who are divided along the lines of being an Ashraf or an Azlaf or an Arzal, and even among Syrian Christians in Kerala who trace their ancestry to Brahmins who were converted by the first apostle, Saint Thomas, who came to South Asia. So I would say that it's so deeply entrenched in the social sphere and the psyche that even conversion has not been able to erase it, and the pride and the privilege that caste networks bring with them. While the lower castes, be it any religion, be it Muslims, be it Hindus, be it Christians, they continue to languish at the very bottom of the social system. And I mean, why is it so strong? I would say because the caste system, and one of the most enduring aspects of the caste system is that it thrives on endogamy and the networks of privilege that it spawns, which has almost led to a sort of a tyrannical hold of majorly upper caste people on the resources and the networks of privilege that these networks provide. I mean, for anyone who belongs to a marginalized community, it's very hard to actually even think of infiltrating these networks, whether be it academia, civil services, literally anywhere, even the private sector. I mean, the discrimination across the private sector in India is rampant. There have been studies conducted about it. So as far as debating caste in India is concerned, we are actually living in very interesting times because we are actually living in the shadow of Hindutva, or Hindu majoritarianism, as some people call it, where the majority of the privileges are actually exercised by none other than upper castes. So, so politically there have been, of course, debates about what keeps such people in power. I mean, that there's been a shift as far as the political orientation of the lower castes is seen, particularly towards the ruling party of India. So that is one aspect that the caste is debated today, and people like Christopher Jaffer Lott have used a materialistic lens to evaluate the shift, talking about the kind of welfareist policies this government has implemented and how successful it has been in consolidating that vote bank along both caste and religious lines. Then another lens that caste is debated through is the most widespread lens, which is the lens of merit, and where affirmative action policies in India are continuously under attack almost all the time, not just socially, but even structurally by India's own legislative or even judicial systems. So time and again, where it is said that, the lower castes avail reservation and they do not exercise, or they are not in possession of as much merit as those of the upper castes, and and reservation should be on the basis of a poverty or an economic basis, forgetting that reservation is all about representation. It is not a poverty alleviation scheme. And of course, there have been studies conducted which say that people who belong to the reserved criteria or who have exercised reservation, availed reservation, perform just as well as any of the upper caste. But then these are just so dominating and rooted notions that it becomes kind of very hard to debate them. But having said that, now there are a number of lower caste organizations and Dalits after 1990s with the emergence of caste-based parties, which have become very powerful regionally, particularly like the Bahujan Samaj Party or the BSP in UP, and Mr. Lalu Yadav's outfit, the Rashtriya Janata Dal in Bihar. So there has been a sort of pushback which has come against these notions, which has come from the marginalized themselves. So that is very heartening to say.
Yes, we can see that in India, caste is very much integrated into the people of Indian.
Yeah.
Third question is, according to the World Inequality Report 2022, India is one of those countries where rights inequality prevails. To what extent do you agree with this statement?
Oh, I agree with the statement, absolutely. I mean, considering that caste, class, and even gender-based inequalities are very deeply rooted in India. And these are all structural inequalities. For instance, if you look at hate crimes in India, they've surged against Muslims and Dalits, particularly in the past 6 or 7 years. But Even now, the majority of under-trial prisoners who are languishing in jail without bail happen to be Dalits and Muslims, which says a lot about India's judicial system, which happens to be dominated by the upper caste, especially Brahmins. But it also happens to be extremely prohibitive in nature. It's very, very expensive actually to access justice. You know, and similarly, if you look at the representation of Dalits, Muslims in either India's administrative services or police services, we find that Dalits and Muslims are, of course, underrepresented. So, having said it, if we talk about research, a political scientist, Christopher Jaffelot, has shed some light on this in the book Majoritarian State, uh, where he comes to the conclusion that that the representation of Muslims across not just government services but even across legislative bodies has now fallen, even from the low level that it used to, it was present at. And even data from the Ministry of Personnel suggests that, while Dalits happen to be overrepresented in the lower grade services, there are hardly any Dalits at the upper echelons of most of India's elite services, or even across boardrooms of private sector companies. And this inequality plays out at all structures, giving the people with the caste and class privilege a lot of access to power. And this is what we've been seeing in India right now.
Yes, we can see that nearly 90% of the all poor Indians and the 95% of the illiterate Indians are Dalits, according to the figure represented by the International Dalit Conference.
Yes.
Concerning the discriminatory caste practices within India, do you think there is an urgency to highlight and call the attention of the international fora towards this issue? Or is it something that will be glozed over or brushed over the carpet of intersectionality?
Yeah. So one more point that I'd like to add about your previous question and then answer this one, that if we look at wealth ownership and inequality in India, there is a study which was conducted around 3 years back. It's called actually Wealth Ownership and Inequality in India, a socio-religious analysis. And it says that if we look at the distribution of wealth in India, it actually happens to mirror the caste distribution, where data says that upper caste Hindus are the richest in India, and they happen to own almost 41% of all assets, and the top 5% own 46% of assets, which leads to a sort of a tyrannical hold and almost disproportionate degree to which these people exercise power in the social and the political sphere. Now, talking about caste discriminatory practices in India and the urgency to highlight it at the international level, if you look at some of the instances which have come to light across, let's say, US or the UK, we see that caste is now emerging as a global problem. Ambedkar had said that as Hindus would continue to migrate across the world, caste would start to emerge as a global problem. And the truth of this statement can just be highlighted by the Cisco case, where there was an IITian, a Dalit, who complained of being discriminated against by his colleague, who was an upper caste Indian, and who went to the same IIT as him, and who knew that that he happened to be a Dalit. But Cisco's HR practices did not forbid caste discrimination. Cisco they didn't even know what caste discrimination actually is. Then there is the Inequality Lab survey, which says that caste discrimination is rampant across campuses in America. So there are now campuses across the US which are banning caste discriminations, like Harvard has banned it recently. Then this Brandeis, California State University, has included caste in their anti-discrimination policy. Similarly, if we talk of UK, which is home to the largest foreign-born population and ethno-national group, which happens to be British Indians, they've now come to play a major role in UK politics. And caste discrimination is entrenched and insidious to the point where lower caste Sikhs or lower caste Hindus have separate temples and gurudwaras to pray. So it's emerging as a global problem, and also what is happening in India is mirrored what is happening in these countries as well, as far as the privilege of the upper caste diaspora can be seen. Having a lot of access to material wealth, resources, they continue to exercise substantial influence in the politics of US and UK. So for instance, the UK government wanted to ban caste discrimination in 2012, but there was a strong backlash from the majorly upper caste Indian diaspora. The UN too has raised the issue continuously. Either we 2001, they raised it in 2016 again through the rapporteur's report. But Indian government stand has always been that caste is India's internal matter, or the West is looking at caste through a racial lens. But having said that, in 21st century, when India is also a signatory to the UN Charter of Human Rights, can we really say that human rights, be it not just India, for any country, it just happens to be an internal matter? I mean, every human being, we all have certain inalienable rights, like the right to equality or the right to life. So I don't think that human right violations can be just brushed away, saying that it's an internal matter. I think it is time that caste discrimination is brought to light at the international level, and we hold discussions on what is happening in not just India, but across UK, US, even Africa, for example. And as far as intersectionality is concerned, I would say that intersectionality, particularly with movements like movements against racism in the West, Islamophobia, or patriarchy, it's the need of the hour for all social justice movements to come together if we are to redress these injustices.
Yes, although the Indian government denies the problem of mistreatment of Dalit, the numerous reports of violence and discrimination indicate that Dalit remain Indians' broken people. I think.
Yeah.
This is the notion that casteism is a colonial construct that has been installed within the era of imperialism and not inherited from India. Do you agree with this notion?
Well, I mean, the British did not go and write Manusmriti, or the British did not write the Purushukta in the Vedas, right, which talks about the supremacy of the Brahmins. So that there is that. But having said it, this idea actually is a sort of a distorted version of a critique of the colonial Oriental view by the likes of Nicholas Dirks, which now happens to be parroted by a lot of Hindu revivalists too. I mean, while it is true that, that it can be said to a certain degree that some of these hierarchies were sort of institutionalized during British rule through, let's say, censuses. But let us also not forget that when the first census was conducted in India, most people actually went ahead and wrote their caste or their sect instead of their religion, because there was no uniform religion which was called Hinduism as such. So more than caste, it is actually the notion of Hinduism, which was a colonial construct, because the British did not really understand South Asia. So they wanted to understand South Asia through a lens of religion, or like they understood Christianity, with a set doctrine, a set of religious books, a theory, and so on. And so and having said that, of course they got help from the upper caste Indians in the interpretation of whatever religious texts. But even in, let's say, the British state's non-interventionist phase, when it created certain opportunities, like which in theory were caste-free, such as equality before the law, or judicial became a principle, or educational institutions and public employment were thrown open to everybody, irrespective of caste and creed. We could see that the people who were actually able to take advantage of these opportunities were the people who were right at the top of the social order. And it only reinforced the privilege of these groups. So it was only the upper castes who could go for an English education or new professions and take advantage of this judicial system. But they continued to believe, the Hindus continued to be governed by the Dharma Shastras, which upheld the privileges of caste. So, so there is, I don't think there is, we could say that that it is an invention or it is a colonial construct. But yes, But when we talk about caste movements, and even later the British state realized that there existed a lot of differences, vast differences actually, between the social and material privileges between upper caste and lower castes. So they did start to take steps in theory to protect Dalits and provide some sort of affirmative action. But still, more often than not, the justice system and the bureaucracy always sided with the upper caste landed elites in the name of preserving the peace. So, Dalits hardly got justice. But what it did do was that it raised the expectations of Dalits and caste movements about being represented across India's legislative bodies, and government services, and so on. And it raised the expectations also in the sense that they were just not willing to accept the status quo. So we see a host of caste movements which come to light in Madras, in Tamil Nadu, under the Justice Party and Periyar. Then there was in Maharashtra, there was one under Jyotiba Phule, and then of course the emergence of Ambedkar, leading to the erection of the Constitution of India, which gave the Dalits their constitutional protection and their rights. So I don't think there is a case to be made about caste being a colonial construct. It has existed way before that, and it continues to exist today.
Nice to know that. Have you witnessed any cases of caste discrimination in your friend and family circle? Would you like to share some? Adding to that, at what extent the denial of caste discrimination in modern India?
I've experienced, my family, for instance, my father has experienced caste discrimination in his own service. He belonged to an elite Indian service, but he experienced caste discrimination, or where some of his seniors would pass snide remarks or comments. Like I said, that it gets subtler as you move up the class ladder. But my grandmother told me of the caste discrimination way back when they used to live in the village, and how difficult it was for them to survive, considering the hold of the Thakurs on the village, where the men of my family would get beaten up for literally anything. Drawing water from the well, or not having tended to the farms of the Thakurs. So yes, and all of this continues even today. Now, if people want to, they want to marry in their village, if Dalits want to marry in their village, and they want to sit on the horse, they cannot do so. They cannot do so while passing through an upper caste area. So and it still persists in the 21st century. As far as the extent of denial towards caste discrimination is concerned, yes, there is definitely a denial, or rather a sort of an apathy, which exists in the upper middle class, upper caste Hindu households. But slowly that is now being challenged, and being challenged very substantially, with the assertion of Dalits across all spheres, whether be it political or legislative, or even using judiciary as a means of asserting their rights. So, but yes, denial exists, and particularly the entire, like I said, that or I talked about the antagonism which exists towards affirmative action policies. That is widespread. And people just refuse to believe that any kind of discrimination actually exists, particularly in urban settings, while it is rampant. You are not given houses. It becomes hard for you to rent a house based on your culinary preferences, or your writing preferences, or your caste, or your religion. It's absolutely widespread.
People say that the caste is very integrated into the people until their deathbed. So that might be the true.
Yep.
So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar used different terms to address the community: untouchables, depressed classes, and boycotted community, rather than using the word Dalit. What will you like to add to this?
So yes, Ambedkar did use different terms, but he also used the word Dalit in a number of instances. For example, in the All India Depressed Classes Congress, which was held in Nagpur in around 1930, he talked about the significance of the Dalit Congress meet. So what used to happen, I think, was that when the meaning of the word used to say the same, but rather, that English and the Marathi version sometimes would use a range of words like a depressed class or untouchable or bhishkrit, boycotted, Dalit, asprashya, untouchable. So, he also talked about the centrality of the Dalit classes as far as the question of independence of India was concerned, where he said that the human rights and adequate representation of Dalits were central to the issue of Indian independence. And he asked Dalits to not be influenced by majoritarian views. Then he also recognized that the Simon Commission of 1928 had been very sympathetic to Dalits, and far more so than the Montague-Chelmsford reforms of 1919. So I think that the word Dalit cannot really be separated from the historical injustices, and more importantly, the revolutionary movements to counter these injustices and oppressions. I mean, these struggles have led to political action for Dalits. But what is more significant as far as Dr. Ambedkar is concerned is that he was perhaps the first person across South Asia to realize the urgency to bring together the fight against both caste and class. So he went on to define caste as an enclosed class. And he said that it was not just a division of labor, but a division of laborers, which, and this definition comes very, very close to actually Marx or Lenin's conception of class, which, which is not just a group of people on the basis of their position of social production, but rather it also encompasses within itself, the word class also encompasses within itself their involved interactions, so the meaning of the word proletariat or capitalist and such, it starts to develop even when the interaction, even as interaction between these classes proceeds. So Ambedkar definitely was not a communist, but he was the first person to actually start a labor party in South Asia. So, and he saw the first labor org of South Asia, which was called the Independent Labor Party, and where he said that the word labor itself included depressed classes or Dalits or untouchables, what you may, because he said that, because even now, if you look at the breakdown of the labor class in India, you would find that most of them actually consist of backward castes and Dalits. So, so Ambedkar was the first person to realize that the battle against class discrimination and caste discrimination was the same, and there was an urgent need to unite both. And that is why perhaps the well-known Dalit intellectual Anand Tiltumde has said that, separation of these two paths, that is between the communists who refused to see caste discrimination and Ambedkar, who knew that caste discrimination was absolutely essential to annihilate, cost South Asia a revolution.
We all know that the census hold importance in drafting the policies, especially at the national level. In your opinion, to what extent can the caste census can help eradicate caste discrimination? What are the benefits of caste census, and what sort of challenges and obstacles are in way of holding a caste census?
Well, if we look at what's been happening in India of late and the political orientation of the current government in power, we see that the entire rhetoric for their appeal to votes is actually based on the idea of Hindu consolidation. So, I mean, and of course, we, as I said, that the material reality in India actually mirrors that of caste distribution, with the upper caste Indians actually holding most of the wealth. So if a caste census were to be held and it were to concretely come to light that even after almost 70 years of independence and almost after a quarter century of market reforms, the condition of India's minorities, and particularly those of the Dalits and backward castes, has actually not improved. It may even have worsened for some of them. That rhetoric or that idea of Hindu consolidation actually shatters. And this is what I think the major fear of this government is, as of now, that they do not want that to happen. Then, of course, there are other issues as well. As far as the government, I mean, going by what the government says, that that people write different caste names or address different caste names through different ways. And so, when they collected their data, they found that the castes which were enumerated in that through data was several times the actual number of castes which exist in India. So they talk about the bureaucratic difficulty and the logistic difficulties in sort of consolidating this data. But as far as policy making is concerned, it would definitely help any honest policymaker if they were to find that people who are still languishing at the margins happen to be the people who also happen to be occupy the lowest rung of the social ladder. So, I think for now, the strongest challenge to that of a caste census is the ideology of the current government in power, I would say.
How are the members of caste identified? As in, how do children learn to recognize people from different castes? If it is due to the surname, what's to stop people from just changing their name or lying about their caste?
Yes, surname is, of course, the primary factor as far as recognizing people who belong to marginalized castes are concerned. And yes, nothing stops people from changing their surname. And yes, maybe up to a certain extent, it is possible that it may shield them from discrimination in spaces, particularly social spaces dominated by upper castes. But you see, that does not really solve the problem, because with that caste surname also comes a lot of privilege, access to these networks of privilege, which just does not really, come to people who belong to a lower caste. I mean, even if I call, for the longest time, I used to hide my caste. And, since I use the surname Singh, people wouldn't identify me as Dalit. But even then, I mean, even having been part of these upper caste spaces, I realized that discrimination was rampant, in the sense that they may not be discriminating against me, but they were still, very much in the know of discriminating against people from my own community. And that also takes its toll on you. I mean, psychologically, that's a heavy toll to bear, that, you are living in constant fear of being sort of found out and not being able to identify or assert your identity as a human being. And that is, for anyone, that is a very heavy burden to bear as a human being. So, solving that doesn't solve, I mean, changing the surname does not really solve the problem. The problem is way, way deeper than, people continue to, than people care to admit. I mean, even if you're an upper caste, say, and you just drop your surname, that does not get you rid of the privilege that you already have. I mean, you already continue to have access to networks of privilege. You have, whether be it academia or politics or anywhere, you will not go through the kind of discrimination or the kind of struggle that people of lower castes will have to go through to just, enter these spaces. And that is where the real problem lies. The problem lies, the root of the problem is representation and equal access to rights, which doesn't just come with, a change of surname. I wish it was that simple.
What has the United Nations done or said about caste discrimination? What's necessary action has the UN previously taken to end caste discrimination?
Well, like we talked before, I mean, in 2001, there was a conference on racism which was held in Durban. where the UN called out India for caste discrimination. And then India's response was one, that it is an internal matter, and two, that that the UN was looking at it through a racial lens. I mean, appropriating the language of positive discrimination, I would say, or the language of anti-imperialism, which is grounded in self-righteousness. Then it happened again in 2016 when there was a special rapporteur report on minority rights, which once again called out the Indian government for an increase in hate crimes against Dalits. And once again, India's response was the same, that it is an internal matter, and the UN is overreaching. It has no rights to interfere in India's internal conditions or internal problems or whatever. But like I said before, that it is time that issues of human rights, and be it anywhere, whether they be caste or whether they be race or whether they be any ethnicity based discrimination, it is time that they are now brought to the forefront and we talk about such things, and we come to terms and conclusion on how we are going to be dealing with this. Such discussions are the only way forward from here. I mean, ignoring the problem or calling it an internal matter or sweeping it under the carpet does not really get rid of the problem as such, unless of course there are people who are so privileged and who fear that privilege will be taken away, that they would rather have these conditions and this system persist rather than this system going away. Then that's altogether a different matter, which also happens to be the case to a very wide extent.
Why do the caste seek your assistance, and why should members of European Parliament be concerned about discrimination against minority and caste-based violence?
Well, like we just talked about it before, that caste is now emerging as a global phenomenon, a global problem. And if you look at, and even if we look at historically, I would say the battle against both race and caste, once, they proceeded in a very parallel manner. They were kind of very intricately combined because, the founding fathers of America, for example, were very, very aware of India's caste system. And, their primary concern was that we do not want a caste system to emerge in America. That was the point of view of the abolitionists in America, that they did not want a parallel caste system to emerge, which was based along the lines of race in America. So, it is time now and high time that as these movements take center stage, and particularly also as right-wing movements across the world are gaining in power, they have now access to power and resources which they did not have a few years ago, and they have now come on to dominate political power in a number of countries, particularly India, America. So it is time, and even in Europe, in certain countries, particularly after the populist phase, I think it is time that global institutions like the EU or the UN, they start to look at these problems of discrimination across countries very, very deeply, because somewhere almost all right-wing movements thrive on such internal cleavages of the society. And, an instability in any part of the country, of course, causes instability and, hampers our progress towards peace anywhere. Like, for instance, we see what is happening in Ukraine and Russia right now, where, racism and neo-Nazism, such words are thrown about, and they also happen to be to a very specific and a certain degree be a part of the problem. So it's time that discrimination, be it of any kind across any part of the world, is now taken note of by the UN and EU, and the global body acts together to address these discriminations.
Last but not the least, What would it be if you could if you could give the message to new generation of people working on human right or development?
I think the most important message that I can actually give young people who want to make the world a better place is to be very self-aware of their own privilege, uh, where they stand, both socially and with respect to the social system of production, that is both their caste and class privilege. And secondly, to not stop fighting. That is the most important message that I can give them, because we are entering very dark times and we must experience very dark times ahead. And it may get very challenging for people who would be working in the domain of human rights. Um, so, and the temptation to give up is going to be very strong in the future, because because progress on the front of human rights is going to be very hard, when we may also experience that human rights are actually taking a sort of a back step to the idea of ethnic nationalism that we see, on a swing now. But the important thing is to not stop fighting to make the world a better place.
So I'm honored to interview you, Mr. Singh, and it was
Thank you
pleasure
so much, Heman.
knowing the insights from you and about the contemporary India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Heman.